I always think the same thing when I hear my own bio read. It's, man, this guy nobody wants to do when he grows up. That's too many different things at too short a time. Well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to apologize in advance because the last time I spoke about intersectionality, I delivered a lecture and it was intersectionality and it was centered around a lot of also LGBT issues. And so for some reason, through about halfway through the lecture, I stopped referring to intersectionality as intersectionality, and unbeknownst to me, we started referring to it as intersexuality, and kept rolling with that the whole time, and no one interrupted and told me. So that may happen. Someone just raise your hand and let me know that I'm doing that. I don't even know what intersexuality is. I'm sure it's something. I don't know what it is. But so I'm going to talk about intersectionality, I'm going to talk about identity politics, and I'm going to use that as a segue over the course of the day into talking about some of the fundamental challenges that are facing not just the church in the United States as a result of these concepts and these ideas, but some of the fundamental challenges that are facing our nation. Okay, so this first lecture is going to be an introduction to the concepts. I'm going to kind of map out the day, okay? So at the end of the day, I want you to understand a couple of concepts very well. One of them, what is intersectionality? What does it mean in practice? And then later in the day, you're going to understand a concept that might be one of the most important things for you to understand, and I'm not going to explain it now. This is a teaser, okay? Called the Law of Group Polarization. If you leave today and all you understand after all this time is intersectionality and the law of group polarization, you're going to understand our nation and the present condition of our nation and present challenges to the church more than 99.9% of all Americans. So we're going to talk about intersectionality, we're going to talk about the law of group polarization, and we're going to roll from that into what is a response. What is a thoughtful Christian response? So that's the broad outlines. So let's dive in, okay? And I'm going to begin, because some of you guys, I'm sure I'm talking to people with a wide variety of backgrounds in the subject. Some of you guys are probably experts in intersectionality. You've thought about it, you've talked about it, you've studied it, and you're coming in here with this skeptical eye. Is he going to talk about this with the appropriate nuance? Is he going to understand the various permutations of it? Or is he going to caricature it? Is he going to create and erect a straw man and torch it? And some of you guys may not know what it is at all. Not at all. And so that presents an interesting challenge because intersectionality is a nuanced subject. It is a nuanced topic. Much like if you come at, let's say you had an Egyptian Muslim came here and he said, I'm going to lecture to you about Christianity. You'd think, oh, interesting. Can't wait to hear what you have to say about it. Which brand of Christianity, Mr. Egyptian Muslim? Are you going to lecture to me about the Southern Baptist faith? Or are you going to lecture to me about Roman Catholicism? Or are you going to lecture to me about those heretics in the PCA, like my denomination? What are you going to do? Are you going to understand all the nuance? And then he gets up and he lectures about sort of the basic fundamentals of Christianity that are accurate, but miss some of the little permutations here or there. So I'm just going to go out right now and I'm going to say it. I'm going to talk about the basic fundamentals of what intersectionality is. And if you want to come up afterwards and talk to me about how bell hooks would disagree with this or that aspect of what I'm saying, we're happy to do that. But one of the things about intersectionality, it is a complex and nuanced topic. I'm not going to be able to hit all of the complexity and all of the nuance. I'm going to get into the basics. And let's dialogue in the Q&A about the other complexities and nuances. But right now I'm going to hit the basics. So what is it? What is it? In its most basic form, what are we talking about? This thing that is capturing so many minds and hearts right now. And it begins with what I would call basic common sense truth, okay? Sort of a basic common sense reality about the world. And it is in essence this, and that is, in a complex society such as ours, oppression and marginalization interact in very complicated ways and compounding ways based on not just one identity that you might have, but multiple identities, okay? So let's just break it down as basic as possible. So if you are an African American male, you experience the world as a male with the privileges that come with masculinity in a traditionally more patriarchal society, but you also experience the world as an African American with all of the economic, cultural, political, etc. marginalization that has occurred over the course of many centuries. So there is a degree of privilege in the masculinity, but there is also a degree of marginalization and oppression in your racial identity. But if you're experiencing the world as an African American female, you're experiencing the world as a woman, as how that has, with all of the historical experience of women in the United States, and as an African American, but the two aren't entirely separate. They're merged in a complicated way, so the way that you experience the world as a woman, as a white woman, is fundamentally different from the way that you experience the world as an African American woman. And even the way that you experience the world as a woman, just trying to carve that segment out, is sort of a fool's errand, because you can't carve out that one part of your identity from the other part of your identity, so that you essentially have a fundamentally different way in which you're experiencing the world. And then you just can compound that. If you're a lesbian African American woman, that is a different kind of experience. It is a different kind of way of being and existing and viewing the world. So I see a lot of you guys are kind of nodding along with me, because isn't that kind of self-evidently true? I mean, you experience the world in different ways, often based on different identities. So there's this sort of fundamental idea that says, look, people of different identities experience the world in different ways. You can't carve it out so neatly that you would say there's a woman's way to experience the world that's universal, and a man's way to experience the world that's universal, or an African American's way of experiencing the world that's universal. You don't carve it out as neatly like that it all works together, it all meshes together. Okay, you're with me? All right. So if that was intersectionality, if that was it, it would be one of the more helpful frameworks for beginning to analyze life in the United States. Because one of the things you would do is you would say, okay, well, let's dive into that, shall we? Let's dive into this and begin to understand the different ways in which people experience the world. Let's collect this data. Let's collect this understanding. Let's hear the stories. Let's hear the experiences, and let's just know the way in which our fellow citizens, our brothers and sisters in Christ, the people that we live and work with and live around, let's understand how they experience the world. But that's not entirely what it is. It's not just a descriptive way of examining the world. It has become a prescriptive way of interacting with the world. And here's what I mean. So intersectionality isn't just this description, it's also a foundation of a political movement. And part of the political movement is you take intersectionality and then you privilege on top of that what is called experiential authority. Okay? What does that mean? What does that mean? So, if there is an issue that arises that is seen as primarily impacting a particular identity group, the identity group that experiences that impact has the experiential authority to speak about that impact in a way that everyone else who is hearing that message should then defer to and ally with. So you have experiential authority combined with what's called allyship. So if an issue arises, let's say it's an issue surrounding, say, police shootings. So the police shooting controversy disproportionately impacts African Americans. So it's a general concept in an intersectional framework the individuals with the experiential authority to deal with the police shooting issue would be the African American community in the United States. And the responsibility of everyone else is to then defer to that experiential authority and ally with the affected identity group. Now, what's interesting about this concept of experiential authority is you can't take it quite so literally. Because what ends up happening is the people in the real world who will speak with experiential authority aren't necessarily the actual individuals who's experienced the issue, but activists who belong to the identity group most impacted by the issue. Does that make sense? So I could be a wealthy African-American doctor's son with an Ivy League education in an Ivy League graduate program, and an issue comes up based on a police shooting in urban St. Louis. And if I am sort of the first person to the microphone about this issue, if I have an existing organization, then my identity as an African-American man provides me with the experiential authority to speak on an issue that I quite literally did not experience and quite literally do not experience. What ends up happening is that the identity imputes to me authority. The identity imputes to me experience. And that is one of the aspects of the way intersectionality and identity politics works in the United States of America and in our body politic in such a way to actually privilege voices who do not, in the most literal sense, have experiential authority, okay? What it does is it tends to privilege activist voices, people who have already decided to engage in the political sphere, in many ways almost regardless of their personal experience or their personal background. Instead, it is an identity-based background that provides the quote-unquote experiential authority regardless of experience. Now, let's combine that with allyship. So then what allyship means is that other people, not part of the identity group, especially if they're other people who do not possess experiential authority, then have a very precise responsibility, and that is to ally, that is to join, that is to support, that is to come alongside. And so what you begin to see here is a very interesting system that is self-sustaining, imbues individuals with real purpose, almost no matter where they are in the spectrum. Okay, now let me back up a little bit. One of the reasons why intersectionality has become so important in American society is because of the very sense of purpose and passion that it provides. Okay, it comes as no surprise to some of you guys that religious belief in the United States is in a state of decline. Now, that's not uniformly across all populations. So, for example, white Republicans are pretty much as religious, as church attending as they've always been. About 72% or more of white Republicans say that they believe in the God of the Bible, according to Pew Research Center studies, about 72%. So, if you talk to white Republicans in 1985 and you talk to white Republicans in 2018, remarkably stable in church attendance, remarkably stable in profession of belief in the Bible. If you look at white independents, for example, you're going to see relative stability. I mean, it's kind of up and down in saying they believe in the God of the Bible. If you talk to black Democrats, the only population in the U.S. As likely or more likely to say they believe in the God of the Bible than white Republicans are black Democrats. Remarkably similar rates of agreement. White Democrats, belief in the God of the Bible has collapsed. If you look at historical trends the line is down, 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 down. Now only about 32% of white Democrats say that they believe in the God of the Bible. Church attendance, white Democrats, down, 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 down. Profession of faith in Christianity or saying that religion is important in their lives, and white Democrats, down, 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 in a state of collapse. So that means, in many ways, what we're dealing with is the emergence of a true post-Christian class of Americans. A true post-Christian class. Now, one of the things we know is that it's not as if you replace something with nothing, right? People generally do not go through their lives without an ultimate set of beliefs. Believe you me. Now, there are many lovely atheists in this world, but some of the most zealous, some of the most incredible religious zealots I have ever known in my life are outspoken atheists who cannot wait to tell you exactly how atheist they are almost as soon as they meet you, and center and order their lives around professing and proclaiming their atheism. Now, I'm not painting with a broad brush of all atheists. I know many atheists are some of those lovely people I've ever met in my entire life. But many of you also know what I'm talking about, that there are people who, even though they do not profess a particular faith, there is something else that takes the place of faith in their life that provides them with animating, transcendent meaning and purpose, okay? This should be common sense to everybody. The Supreme Court has recognized this forever. That's why free exercise of religion doesn't just, in the First Amendment, has not been construed to just protect free exercise of religion, as in a formal religion, but the free exercise essentially of a worldview that takes the place of and assumes the importance of religion. So that, ironically enough, an atheist enjoys the exact same free exercise rights that I enjoy. That they have the exact same protections from intentional government action directed against them because of their atheism as I enjoy from intentional government actions directed against me because of my Christianity. So this is all, like the most basic common sense here. That there is something that in each of us either it is a religion or has the place of religion. All right, so let's back up a bit to intersectionality. The power of intersectionality is that it does what few other competing worldviews to Christianity, it does what few competing worldviews to Christianity are able to do, and that is this. It imbues a person with a sense of virtuous purpose. What is the sense of virtuous purpose? It is combating historical discrimination, marginalization, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia. So you have a animating sense of overpowering purpose. You're with me? Virtuous, not just any purpose. I mean, there's some purposes that empower people's entire worldviews that are not inherently virtuous, such as worship of college football. I remember, it might have been 5 years ago, just refer to it as the dark time when virtually every major SEC school lost its bowl game. And I remember going to church the following Sunday, and literally there was a pall that had settled upon the whole church. Like every guy was just looked wasted, just like destroyed, like something had happened. And one of my good friends, his wife came up to me and she said, "Every Southern man just had his idol melted on Saturday." I was like, that's it, exactly. But it provides a sense of virtuous purpose, because who among us, I doubt there's anybody in here that, pro-racism right here, pro-sexism right here. The most devout Christian is not going to stand here and go pro-homophobia, because we know that a lot of the accusations of homophobia, although homophobia does exist, it is a thing, a lot of the accusations about homophobia are really disagreements over the meaning of biblical texts and the meaning of biblical theology. But few people are going to sit there and go, pro-homophobia, pro-trans. Nobody's saying that. So these things, combating racism, combating sexism, these are good things. It's a virtuous purpose. So it provides a sense of virtuous purpose. And it also provides a mission and a role. So one of the most powerful things, in my view, about the lived experience of the Christian faith is the whole concept that we're different parts of the body. That each one of us has our place in the body of Christ. You know, some are teachers, some are pastors, some have prophetic role in ministry. You just go down the list from everything from teaching Sunday school to collecting the chairs after Sunday school, everything from organizing the ministry meals for distressed members of the community and church to cooking them. Every aspect, a person can find a role in the church. If they want to dive into the church, they can find a role. And it's incredibly powerful, it's incredibly meaningful, and it builds an enormous amount of community when you're dealing with a healthy and functioning church. So what does intersectionality, how does it provide that role? Through allyship. At every point in the intersectional walk, you can know your role. You are either, if your experiential authority and your identity group is the one most impacted, you assume authority in that moment, or if you're not, you defer authority and you provide allyship. And when you begin to see what allyship is, you often can't miss it. It's one of the reasons why when you see on the progressive side of the spectrum, you might see an issue arise, and all of a sudden, all these other groups in the progressive world who don't necessarily have a connection in their own mission statements to that issue will jump on top of it and will be all about it. So you'll see arguments like net neutrality is somehow related to reproductive justice. What? I don't think so. You had Planned Parenthood of Kentucky tweeted out not long ago, some men have a uterus, some men have a uterus, some men have a uterus. Well, I don't think that's what Planned Parenthood's mission is, to proclaim, to proclaim truth around issues of gender identity and gender dysphoria. But once you begin to understand what's happening is you're seeing that under allyship, if I'm part of the broader coalition, if I'm part of the broader church, my mission is always to support the rest of the church. So who here, I'm sure some of you have heard about the Green New Deal. Okay, the Green New Deal. Did y'all read it? And I'm not talking about the FAQ document that was controversial that talks about farting cows or replacing all of air travel with rail. That was a FAQ document prepared by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's team and nobody else. The actual resolution itself. How many people read the resolution? One person. You get a gold star. Oh, two whole, three? Okay, you must have academic work to do or something. But, because someday a pollster is going to call you and they're going to ask you what you think of the Green New Deal. And you better say, I don't know. I don't know what I think. Well, now you're going to know what to think because I'm going to tell you. But if you look at the Green New Deal, you cannot read and you cannot understand the Green New Deal without understanding intersectionality. I did it. I told you, intersectionality. You cannot read, you cannot understand the Green New Deal without understanding intersectionality. Because if you read the Green New Deal, only part of it is about climate policy. Only, maybe half of it is actually about climate policy. A part of it talks about it's going to guarantee a job with a living wage to every single American, to all people of the United States, guaranteed a job with a living wage. That's part of the Green New Deal. It's part of the Green New Deal to repair the ecological damage and to preserve and to protect endangered species. Part of the Green New Deal. It's part of the Green New Deal to make sure that every single American has access to affordable health care. It's part of the Green New Deal to repair the damage done to historically marginalized communities in the United States. So racial reconciliation is part of the Green New Deal. Guys, that's that intersectionality. when one part of the enterprise, when one part of the intersectional enterprise is locked in, all parts are locked in. All parts are locked in. It's all parts of the body coming together to labor side by side. So when you think of it like that, can you not see its power? Can you not see why it has caught on? Virtuous purpose combined with a precise and definable mission, combined with community. Put those things together and you have an enormous sense of place. You have an enormous sense of mission. You have an enormous animating idea. You don't wake up in the morning, if you're really and fully involved in intersectionality, you don't wake up in the morning wondering, what am I doing with my life? You don't wake up in the morning and say, what is my purpose on this earth? You don't have those feelings. You don't have that questioning. At the very least, you can join a Twitter mob for the day. At the very least, you can hashtag something. You've got a purpose. And interestingly, you can see the power of it, and people first began to see the power of this on college campuses. Because some of these fundamental ideas about intersectionality are not necessarily new. I mean, you're going back decades for some of these fundamental ideas. But the way in which it caught on with everyday, regular people is relatively new. So for a long time, thoughtful people in the progressive world have known that we have to rethink things on a fundamental level if we're going to reshape American society. One of the most influential essays written was 1960s by a guy named Herbert Marcuse. And he wrote an essay that essentially said, if we're going to transform this country, we need to rethink the whole concept of tolerance. Okay? He said tolerance, as something that is commonly understood, so Professor Burke and I, we may disagree vehemently on many things. He thinks LSU football has a hope for a future. I think it's just mainly got a colorful coach. It's going to be forever in Nick Saban's shadow. And so tolerance would say that he and I would say our piece, maybe debate the future of LSU football in front of you guys. You guys would hear both of our arguments, decide who you agreed with, who you disagreed with. We'd have a thoughtful engagement. And Marcuse said, no. What tolerance does is it permits entrenched power to stay in place. Because what it does is it says that if I have a majoritarian view, and you continue to hear my majoritarian view, and you continue to hear the views of other people like me who have a majoritarian view, I'm just going to keep on winning. Me, the majoritarian, I'm just going to keep on winning. So what tolerance does is it deceives you into thinking that you're being something open, when really what you're doing is just perpetuating the hegemony, because you're just allowing the already powerful to speak. And sure, you might let some people who are not as powerful, but they're going to be swamped. They're just going to be swamped by the points of view of the already powerful. So what we need is what he called a liberating tolerance. So there's another word for liberating tolerance. It's called intolerance, okay? But what the liberating tolerance was we're going to privilege previously marginalized voices, and we're going to suppress previously powerful voices. We're going to turn the whole thing upside down. And Marcuse ends his essay with like this, sense of lament, like, well, this is my idea, but because people who are powerful, and people who are powerful aren't going to give up their power, it's just never going to be a thing. This liberating tolerance will never really happen, because what institution in American society is going to upend the structure, is going to suppress the dominant and privilege the dominated? Is there an institution that'll do that? And he ends his essay on a very pessimistic note, as if he'd never met a college administrator. And so what ends up happening over the next many years is this Marcusean notion of liberating tolerance gains a ton of currency in sort of elite academic circles. You guys have heard of a speech code? So a speech code was actually, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, college campuses began to pass speech codes, and they would call them a speech code. They were just like, out with it. And the whole goal of the speech code was to suppress speech that was seen as inflicting any kind of psychological or emotional harm on disadvantaged communities, to allow this speech and to allow wide open room and space for people from disadvantaged communities to speak. Now, the problem was that was all blatantly unconstitutional. It was also conceptually difficult to execute. So I'm going to tell you about a speech code that I filed a lawsuit against about 15 years ago. But you have to promise me you will not think too hard about the language I'm about to share with you, because if you do, it might rip a hole in the space-time continuum. And you'll see what I mean. So I filed a lawsuit against a college in Pennsylvania that had a speech code that said this: acts of intolerance will not be tolerated. Okay, let's think about that but not too long. So if I commit an act of intolerance, that will not be tolerated, which is an act of intolerance that cannot be tolerated. Stop. It's like, when you have mirrors, two mirrors side from side, and it's just, you see some part of your face for infinity. If you actually apply the policy, it's intolerance for infinity until we're all intolerant. So some of this was just, it didn't make a lot of sense. And the problem was it was also imposed on a top-down basis. So acts of intolerance became whatever a bunch of administrators said it was. What should be privileged or should be suppressed was based on what a small class of administrators said it should be. But by the time sort of these concepts for intersectionality and the meaning and the power and the purpose that can give people began to filter through the culture, around 2013 and 2014, Greg Lukianoff, my friend and former colleague at the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, puts it this way as he described what happened. Demands for censorship in the United States became less in college campuses, came less from the top down and more from the bottom up. You began to see students calling for censorship. You began to see students calling for intolerance. You began to see a wave of shout-downs and interruptions and heckling and all of this stuff on college campuses, because what you were seeing was, I would argue, the beginnings of essentially a mass religious movement centered around these specific ideas, a virtuous purpose, a very precise mission, animating goals, and it had reached the level of everyday average students. It had reached the level of everyday average people in the United States. And this was a religion, to be clear, that did not necessarily have as one of its tenets, love your enemies, bless those who persecute you. It might have as its tenets, banish your enemy, destroy those who you perceive as persecuting you. And it's one of the reasons why now, if I talk to a group, you guys are younger than the average group that I talk to, because I'm a conservative, my average audience is 85. You're a little younger than the average group that I talk to. So you might not be a great sample for this. But in the average group that I talk to, which is not quite 85, I will say this. This is a fact. It is an absolute fact that as a citizen in the United States, you have more protection right now from government censorship than at any time in American history. The protections of the First Amendment are more legally robust right now, this day, today, than they have ever been in the history of the United States. And that's because of bipartisan, many 9-0, some 7-2 judicial decisions. So any one of you who ever has heard this statement, yeah, we have to elect Donald Trump or the First Amendment's just going to be gone. That person doesn't know what they're talking about, okay? What they have is a sign that says, I only read Ann Coulter's tweets, okay? So there has been a large-scale, multi-generational transformation of First Amendment jurisprudence in this country to be more protective of free speech rights than any time in the history of the United States of America. You're just more free from the government. But if you're thinking about, do you feel more free right now to speak about very contentious issues involving sexuality, gender identity, race, etc., right now than you did 10 years ago when some of you were 9? No, right now than you do 10 years ago. And not even the trolls in the back of the room will raise their hand and say, yeah, totally. Totally. I just let fly on Facebook and it's fine. Nobody says that. Nobody says that. Because right now we live in an environment where people feel as if they're one misbegotten Facebook post away from losing their job. They're a previously undiscovered tweet away from losing their job. I was in my Sunday school class in Franklin, Tennessee, and some of you guys are pretty familiar with Greater Nashville and Franklin. You know, you've heard of the Bible Belt. Some people call Nashville the belt buckle of the Bible Belt. That's wrong. It's the Jerusalem of the Bible Belt. I mean, it's the home of the Southern Baptist Convention, the Christian publishing industry, the Christian music industry. There's a ton of professional Christians in Nashville, Tennessee, and they all live in Franklin. Okay, they live in Franklin and they commute to Nashville because Nashville's too blue for them to live. They live in red Franklin, commute to blue Nashville. And so I'm sitting there in Sunday school and a guy says, you know, I'm really afraid to talk openly about my faith on my own Facebook page because I feel like I might lose my job. That's in Nashville that he thinks that. He's not entirely wrong to believe that. Why? Why? Because what one aspect of what has become, and it's not necessarily inevitably or entirely necessarily even, it's not an inevitable consequence of intersectionality, but what has become a part of intersectionality is this animating view that one of the purposes of the movement is to be intolerant towards perceived intolerance. And part of allyship is jumping on the intolerant, is gang tackling online. Sometimes in, like for example, at Middlebury College, they tried to literally gang tackle Charles Murray from AEI. Sometimes physically, but mostly literally, attacking and tackling the intolerant. And one of the aspects of this, and then I'm going to open it up for some questions before we move on to the next part. One of the aspects of this that's really important for people to understand is that all of this, getting people fired, causing a person to lose your job, is seen as the work of the virtuous, the work of the righteous to smite the unrighteous. It is seen as fundamentally good and right. It is seen as fundamentally and positively transforming the United States of America. And it is not an attitude in any way, shape, or form grounded by a love for your enemies. It is without grace. It is without mercy in any way, shape, or form. And that is something that is beginning to dominate public discourse in the United States. So I'm a writer, and I'm a conservative. I'm a Christian conservative. I'm a Southern white male Christian conservative, which means not only do I not have any intersectionality at all, I'm like a divided superhighway of oppression. And so I write and I speak about a lot of these issues, though. I'm very interested in them. I've been involved in battles on campus for 20 plus years. And one of the things that I have been trying to talk about and trying to urge and reintroduce into this culture is a little notion called forgiveness, a little idea called actual tolerance. And that without forgiveness, without actual tolerance, this place, this country, will become an increasingly intolerable place to live. Increasingly intolerable. And what is true tolerance? So if you talk to, I have lots of friends on the progressive side of the aisle, and we talk about this all the time. And one of the things that, you can ask, and this is an idea advanced by a guy who wrote under the name Scott Alexander, psychologist. He's talking about something he began to notice that when he would talk to his truly tolerant friends, and this is a guy broadly identifies on the left, he'd say, why do you think you're tolerant? Well, I'm tolerant because I love all people, regardless of race, regardless of sex, regardless of gender identity, regardless of sexual orientation. I love all of them. He goes, well, what's wrong with them? And he says, and the response is, well, nothing. What do you think I am, a bigot, a homophobe, a racist? And he says, well, then what are you tolerating? Doesn't tolerance imply there's something to tolerate? So what we're not talking about in this country often is actual tolerance. Actual tolerance involves loving Denny in spite of his Ed Orgeron idolatry. It involves understanding and knowing who you are and how you disagree with me and how you may fundamentally think I'm wrong, right? I'm fundamentally wrong. And yet embracing you as a human being and even, how about this, defending the rights of others that you would like to exercise yourself. I call that the legal corollary to the golden rule. It's a great way of demonstrating tolerance, but it is often utterly alien to our current experience. Our current experience is not to show mercy or any grace. It is to punch back twice as hard. It is to make the other side live up to its own rules. You'll hear that online all the time. And look, guys, failure tolerance is now a bipartisan phenomenon, fully and completely. I'm just going to guess, because I'm at a evangelical outfit here, this is probably a little bit of a right-leaning audience. Maybe not as much as if I was talking to the same group in a Baptist church in the suburbs, but probably right-leaning audience. And some of you guys have maybe heard about a guy named James Damore. James Damore was a Google software engineer who wrote a manifesto about how he thought why he thought Google was failing to hire more female software engineers and how it could fix that problem without engaging in sex-based discrimination in hiring. Without, in other words, hiring a woman in part because they're a woman and discriminating a man against a man, equivalently qualified man, because he's a man. Wrote it in good faith, said that there are reasons why fewer women were choosing to become software engineers. Fewer women were choosing to enter into computer science because he said it was a product of free choice. It wasn't a product of overt discrimination or even subtle discrimination. Women were not choosing to enter this field. And he suggested some ideas as to how to deal with this. As soon as his document leaked, was it 24? Was it 36? Was it 48 hours before he was fired? He was out, even though Google had encouraged its employees to grapple with this issue, even though there was no report of any that I'm aware of that he had discriminated against anybody in the workplace. There was no complaint against his workplace conduct at all. It was the presence of a man with intolerable ideas that was intolerable to Google, and he was out. And it's weird. You want to know how weird it is? Damore filed a lawsuit which contains all of the ways in which Google was tolerant towards other points of view and not him. Now, he may not win because it's hard to win a lawsuit against a company for political discrimination, and it should be hard to do that because a company has its own First Amendment rights. But one of the things that he pointed out was Google once hosted a lecture by a person who claimed to be a binary being, okay? Now, you may not know, this person's binary being was, and I don't have the complaint in front of me, so I might get a bit of the details wrong, but the fundamentals of this right. They were also a human woman and a yellow-scaled dragonkin. Okay, how many in here have played World of Warcraft? One other cool person. Two other, okay. As many people have played World of Warcraft as have read the Green New Deal, okay? So if you played the World of Warcraft, you know what a yellow-scaled dragonkin is. It's a pretty vicious, I thought, mythical creature that looks, vaguely dragon-like. I mean, dragonkin, dragon-like. I've slaughtered many of them in my days defending Azeroth as the level now 110 Shadow Priest Ricky Bobby. So anyway, you tolerate a person who claims to be a human and a mythical dragon-like creature, but an actual libertarian is, nope, sorry. And look, I felt bad for James Damore. I hated I hated the pile-on against him. I hated that he lost his job. But I got to be honest, part of you, when you see an outrage like this, and you're in the writing business like I am, you're like, material. So, oh my gosh, did I mount my pulpit and inveigh against Google? And Google deserved it. Google deserved it. So I'm thinking, every now and then you kind of start to feel good about the tribe you belong to. Like, hey, we're right on this issue. We're right on this issue. Then there's this quarterback, see, and he was upset at police violence. And he did this thing. He kneeled in the national anthem, right? And the president of the freaking United States of America gets in front of a rally, and I believe it was Pensacola, and just sort of like this just perfect storm of awfulness. I think it was as part of the effort to elect Roy Moore. Says, fire them. Fire them. All those kneeling players, there's maybe like 3 or 4 at the time who are kneeling. Fire them. Crowd. I'm like, whoa, hold on. Hold the phone. Wait a minute, weren't we just ticked off at the idea of a private company firing a dissenting employee who was just respectfully expressing his point of view? And now we're like screaming and cheering and yelling to fire these guys who are respectfully kneeling? Do we not know anything about our nation's history? Do we not? Let's see. All right, I'm going to ask another trivia question. Who here has heard of the case West Virginia v. Barnett? 1, 2, oh man, this is a constitutionally literate group compared to World of Warcraft, which I have mixed feelings about, okay? But for the majority of you who don't know what West Virginia v. Barnett is, in January of 1942, now many of you will know the significance of that date, we just entered World War II, and the Board of Education for the state of Virginia passed a resolution requiring students to stand and salute the flag and repeat a Pledge of Allegiance. Now, if there was ever a time in our nation's history to have a government encouraged joint Pledge of Allegiance, it would be January 1942. Because a lot of people think, we forget what a crisis we were in. This is all people now know about World War II history. Okay, I'm going to sum up probably a lot of your collective knowledge of World War II history. Pearl Harbor, #America, victory. It was, Pearl Harbor happens, we kick some tail, and we win. Greatest generation, hoorah. No, it was Pearl Harbor followed by a string of defeats that were terrifying. The worst defeats in the history of American arms occurred following Pearl Harbor, culminating in the loss of the Philippines and the Bataan Death March. All of that was happening in early 1942. So it wasn't just that the United States of America was at risk. Western civilization was hanging in the balance. Hitler was strong in 1942. Strong. Japan was strong in 1942. We were getting beat in 1942. So if there was ever a need for people to unite, it was January 1942. And so everybody stands in West Virginia, except a couple of young girls, Jehovah's Witnesses. No, it's in tribute to them that I always happily accept the Watchtower when offered. Like, I'm nice, I don't read it. I don't read the Watchtower. I'm not being seduced by Jehovah's Witnessism. Is that how you'd call it? Jehovahism, whatever. I don't get seduced by Jehovah's Witness theology. But I'm nice to the Jehovah's Witness missionaries because these two young ladies who say, no, I love America, but I'm not going to salute a flag because I think it's worshiping the flag. And goes to the Supreme Court. And in 1943, the outcome's still in doubt in 1943. The Supreme Court says these words, if there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, is no official, high or petty, can prescribe what is orthodox. Law, culture, nationalism, religion. No official, high or petty, can prescribe what is orthodox. With those words, the Supreme Court, in some of the darkest challenges of our nation's history, enshrined as a matter of constitutional principle the idea that not even the president, nobody, can tell you what to say, even if it's pledging allegiance to the flag in the worst war in our nation's history, other than the Civil War. But, obviously the justices were not familiar with the threat of Colin Kaepernick to the American Republic. And what I began to see and what I began to understand is that America was beset with competing visions of intolerance, with competing worldviews that were showing no mercy, no love, no forgiveness, no tolerance. And that is one of the fundamental challenges of our time. So I've spent some time talking about intersectionality, but intersectionality has led to, and it's not entirely intersectionality's fault, but it is part of the problem, a competing backlash of intolerance, a competing worldview that sheds the fundamentals of the Christian faith in favor of a pugilistic version of a political faith that's now at war with the other side. And it is introducing and is perpetuating what I believe is a dark time in American history that could soon be darker still. Now, and I'm going to talk about, just to tease in the next lecture, because you'll really want to stay for this, why it's going to get worse. So this is going to be awesome.